Hello and welcome to this game review. So in this one we will talk about dynamic advantages and how to exchange them into more static advantages that we can enjoy in the more long term. So here we have the Scandinavian, and the white really helps us by developing our queen. And now the queen on d5 is quite well placed because there is no knight on b1 anymore that can attack our queen. So d4, and now black starts to develop with tempo. Knight c6 is a nice move attacking the pawn. Bishop g4 attacking here. Bishop 2 and castles again attacking the pawn. So white tries to attack the queen so that black's advantage in development does not increase. For queen e4, you mentioned queen f5 was better, but this is only a slight improvement to e6, and yeah, d5 is stopped. And if d5 is stopped, then d4 is a slight weakness. Black can develop quite naturally. He should be quite a bit, well, not better, but quite more comfortable. And queen e4 is fine. And now e5 is played, which is a possible way to play, continuing the initiative. After d5, now the knight is attacked. So we should already understand that if we lose the initiative, then white will have more space with this pawn on d5, which is a static advantage. And here black had the chance to exchange his advantages into something more static by taking here, as you mentioned. And here, if white takes like this is a free pawn, as this pawn is pinned. So black now has gained a long-term advantage, which is an extra pawn. So instead white should take like this. And after this, black has two long-term advantages, the structure and also the long-term king safety, which is in black's favor as well. So bishop b4, knight d2, and here black's advantages are not that big anymore, but he can again take a long-term advantage, which is the extra pawn, which he does. And now after castles and knight d4, we get to this position where black has an extra pawn, and there's not much else that black has, but an extra pawn is quite good. So now the initiative is over. White is able to castle, but black has something to be proud of. After rook hg1, black decides to put a queen on h3, which is a bit strange, as if we can take a free pawn for nothing, we should probably do it. And this happened anyway, but now white was in time to take the pawn on f7, so we do not have the pawn anymore. So this was a strange moment. We should think about why we are not taking the pawn. The queen is not really trapped, as it can run away in this diagonal, so there was no reason to give up a pawn for nothing. So now we get the structure, and both sides have two pawn islands, and black has this passed pawn on d4, which isn't the greatest pawn in the world, and we should assume that we were probably going to lose it. It will take some time to take it, but the most important pawn here is actually the one on h5. And black already has a rook behind this passed pawn, so the most obvious idea here is probably to push the passed pawn as soon as possible and try to queen it. Probably here this passed pawn will not really become a queen anytime soon because white has a lot of attacking pieces, but generally this should be the idea. Okay, rook f8, and now white does not yet pick up this pawn, and after a few moves, here white's king decides to go for a march, which is a bit strange. First the knight is attacked, and white could defend it like this, after which black is probably doing quite well after rook takes f2, and for example taking and finally moving the rook to f4. And here black will be okay if he finds some moves blockading the pawn. This pawn might start going at some point, and instead after king d3, here black has a very winning advantage if he plays the only check of the position, rook f3. So instead black pushes the h-pawn, which is a general good move and useful move, but it's much more important to win material and win the game if possible. And here we could have calculated this line starting with rook f3. And the most important part of this was not king e2 or king c2 that you calculated, because this is quite clear. We're taking a piece with tempo, and we are going to be in time to not get checkmated in one move. I think what you missed was king d4, after which, surprisingly, black has this beautiful checkmate with bishop c5, similar to the game. If the king takes, then here, and if the knight takes, then there is queen f6, the king has to move here, and this is a checkmate. So this is quite a difficult calculation, but if you see this, at least the rook f3 move on the game, then you must calculate it until the end and figure out if it's winning or not. Always check the checks, captures, and attacks before thinking about some kind of more abstract moves such as h5. So that was a big miss. Now king d4. This king is quite weak, and at the moment, had white played f3, he would be quite okay, though it is quite dangerous with such a king. But after this, finally black has the chance to exploit this weak king. And again, you mentioned you did not see this checkmate, but this is extremely important. You did not annotate why you did not see this checkmate, and it's clear that you did not consider the move bishop c5, because if you did, after the only legal move king c5, queen b6 is one of the checks, more or less almost the only check, which is checkmate. So this must be seen in our games. We must see these mates in two, and the only way to see them is to look for them consciously by looking for checks, captures, and attacks. So this was another miss, and this was exactly the same thing such as rook f3. We did not check the checks of the position. We have to keep in mind that when we think about bishop c5, of course we're losing a bishop, but until we haven't made the move, we are not losing the bishop. We can take a few seconds to think about a check. Instead, this happens. Now we get this endgame where white's king is kind of safe. Black exchanges the rooks, and we go here. So here, black has a simple plan of queening the pawn, while white has the majority on the queen side, so eventually he will play d6. So the position should be more or less equal. Also, black should do something about the threat of checkmate. And after this check, the king actually is a little bit too active here. And here black had a very nice idea of playing the check a5. Again, it's a check, which gives lift, which means that black will not have to waste time later, because here we're doing it with check. The king can't really take it because of queen c5, after which we are getting back the pawn with checks, and our queen is a lot more active than the opponent's. This king is very weak, which is also extremely important in queen endgames. And most importantly, we have not wasted time, and we have created some more weaknesses. Okay, queen d2, and here the lift is created, queen d2, but the position is more or less equal now. Black loses this pawn, so decides to just push this one. So black shouldn't really lose, as the white queen should always babysit this passed pawn. So here c5, queen g3. White is getting some kind of counterplay, and here white has a perpetual check if he wants it. He decides to go here, and now black finds a very accurate series of moves, which actually surprisingly wins the game, starting with queen c3. So now if king a4, I assume queen c6 was the idea, trading queens, because here we can understand that any queen trade will basically win the game for black, unless some exception happens, because the very distant passed pawn makes the pawn endgames all hopeless for white. So even though white has more pawns, it's quality over quantity, so this pawn is much more important than these two. So here b4, and now black finds this amazing move, king c8, getting out of the perpetual checks, and almost putting white in zugzwang. The reason this is a very good move is because queen a3 is very tempting, taking the pawn with check, but surprisingly now the king gets out of his corner. But now after king c8, it's not clear what white should do, and after d7, white tries to take the pawn on b7, but this is impossible because of the interposing check, queen c7. So instead, white should have done something else, queen b5, and it is quite surprising that this position is winning, but it turns out white will soon run out of checks. For example, like this. Oops, not king b8, instead king c8, and after queen e6, king b8, and finally king a7. and the white is out of checks. Now there is some threat. The pawn is also queening. So surprisingly, this is winning. But here, of course, this is winning, even though black has less pawns. His pawn is much better than these two. So this is enough to queen the pawn and win. So quite well played by black. And not many big mistakes happened, but mostly they were tactical misses and opportunities to win the game, which should be addressed. And I think the best way to do this is to always check the checks, captures, and attacks on every single move, especially the checks, without any exception. This is something that we must do in our games.